Today I want to share with you how to make some seitan steaks. We're going to be doing the wash the flour method, which is honestly the best way to get the most impactful flavor while having the best texture. To accomplish this, we're going to be using just regular flour. I'm going to be using a higher protein bread flour, but you can make this work with an all-purpose flour as well. First step to making this is we're going to be measuring out our flour. You can use either all-purpose flour or bread flour. I've noticed that you get a little bit more amount of seitan in the end if you use a higher protein flour, because with the process of washing the flour, we're going to be washing away all of the starch away from the protein, so we'll be left with a ball of pure protein, which is, the gluten. So we're going to measure out 6 cups of flour for this. Getting these amounts doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. You just want to have around 6 cups of flour. There are a lot of other recipes that use a whole 12 cups of flour, and I just feel like that is way too much to process all at once. I would much rather just start with 6. So then we're going to be adding about 2.5 cups. We just want like we want a firm dough. We don't want it too gooey, but like I said, this amount isn't completely solid, but I find that using 2.5 cups of water works the best. And this is pre-measured. And since this recipe doesn't really use any specialized equipment, if you don't have it, you can at this point either hand knead the dough or you can use a stand mixer. Just because I have it, I'm going to use my stand mixer. Now at this point we've kneaded the dough. This dough's a little bit sticky, so I'm going to add a little more flour. But we want a nice elastic dough. So I'm just going to hand knead it with a little bit more flour. Just like this. And we're really just trying to get the dough to be nice and elastic. Really develop those gluten strands. How elastic that is. Look at how it's like bouncing back in. I think this is perfect. So we have a big bowl of water and literally just going to plop our nice elastic dough into the water. We want just enough to make it covered. The real amount of water that you use doesn't matter as long as it's fully covered like this. And we're going to be adding a ton of salt, like really salty. Think salty as the ocean. None of this salt is actually going to get into the gluten, so it won't result in a salty seitan. This is just really going to help the process of getting those gluten strands to really form and to separate the starch from the gluten. If I had to guess how much, I would have to say like do close to like 2 tablespoons worth, like a lot of salt. As much as you're comfortable with. And you're going to let this rest for a minimum of 3 hours. I'm going to be letting it rest overnight because I've had the best results that way. We let our dough ball soak in this salt water overnight, and what's kind of crazy is like if you look at this, like if you just kind of like tap the dough, you can see like clouds of the wheat starch just kind of starting to come out already. So that's really awesome. That saves us some work because, I don't know, just like when you have like a no-knead dough recipe for like making bread, the key is to let it rest overnight so the gluten develops. So this is really the best way to get the most separation of the starch from the gluten. So what we're going to be doing is rinsing or draining out the salt water, refilling it with fresh water, and then we're going to start washing it. It's very simple. So I'm going to start by dumping this out. And what's cool is that it's still like a solid dough ball even though it's been soaking in water overnight. The first time I made wash the flour version of seitan, I I thought that it was going to turn into like pancake batter, but it doesn't. That doesn't happen at all. Strained and refilled the water. As you can see, this is super cloudy already. And what we're going to be doing is really just kind of like grabbing the dough like this. And you can already see, like, look at this. This, like, this, I don't know if you can see what this is pulling. This is already pure gluten. The starch has already been washed away from this little chunk, and the goal is to do that with all of this. So it's going to, when I say like washing it, you just kind of like grab it like this, and I don't know, it just kind of clouds out. So it's like, it's weird. It's kind of just like, I don't know, running it through your fingers, and you're gonna get all this like cloudy stuff, and we're just gonna keep going. The texture of the dough is going to change very dramatically as we wash away the starch from all of this. So as you're kneading the dough, the texture is going to start kind of becoming like this. It'll firm up. Like, I know this looks like really, really gloopy right now. Like, look at this. It looks really gloopy right now, but don't worry, it's going to firm up. And like, my process for like going through here, literally just like kind of smooshing it with my fingers. Just boop. So I'm gonna set this water aside. I'm gonna put the dough ball in here, just to kind of try to help keep it together. Doesn't look like any of it fell through here. We're gonna save this starch water. We're gonna be saving this. We're just gonna set it aside. We're gonna give this dough ball another wash really quick. And sometimes I just like to use a little sprayer because it just like helps speed up the process a little bit. You can see like this is already really like firmed up like. So we're just gonna keep doing that same process where we're just gonna keep squeezing the dough through our fingers. But it's still gonna turn out to be like quite, I don't know, like look at how gloopy this is. Now that we have our dough or our gluten fully washed, it is ready to go. I'm going to separate out about 1/4 of it and put this in the blender with our other ingredients to really like incorporate our seasonings, and then we're going to knead it all together. Our next step is we're going to be seasoning our seitan. So I'm going to grab this little chunk. Like I said, it was going to be a 1/4 chunk or about 1/4 of the gluten, and then we're going to be adding all of this. So we're going to be adding a tablespoon of miso. I recommend using a red miso just because it has like that extra like nami depth to it. I'm all out, so I'm using regular yellow miso. But like I said, it would taste that much better if you had red. Tablespoons of soy sauce or Tarmari. Now, this is where you kind of have some choices. You can either add some red food coloring, you could add beet powder, or if you are prepared, I'm adding a bit like a chunk of a beet that I steamed last night. This is going to give the seitan a nice red hue. You could also use beet juice. I'm using about, I don't know, like a 2-inch chunk. Otherwise I recommend doing about 2 to 3 tablespoons of beet powder. However, that's going to wash out. It's going to make the seitan kind of brown because as you cook beets, it kind of turns from magenta pink into a nice brown color. This is another option, liquid iron. Now iron is what's in blood, right? So if we want to make like a bloody tasting steak, adding actual liquid iron is really going to help. I ordered this online. I think you could also get this, actually no, I think I got this from Natural Grocers. So like a health food store would carry this, but otherwise order it online. I'm literally just going to add a few drops of this. Like I said, this is optional. I just like it because it adds like an extra like bloody taste. On that note, blackstrap molasses also adds a pretty bloody taste because it's also very high in iron. Steak happens to be high in iron, so it's going to taste bloodier. It's going to have that iron flavor. So we're going to do a tablespoon of blackstrap molasses. I'm also going to do a tablespoon of nutritional yeast flakes. I'm using smoked Torula yeast, which is very similar to regular nutritional yeast flakes. I prefer this because it has it's been smoked. It's just like a smoked yeast. It really adds like a really nice depth, a really nice meaty flavor. This stuff's my favorite. I will link it in my website if you want to try it. I had to order this online. I don't know anywhere that actually sells it. I love it for making seitan, and this, if you ever want to make like a chicken style seitan, this stuff is the best. Add a teaspoon of garlic powder, teaspoon of onion powder, and then a teaspoon of smoked paprika. I think the smoky flavors taste really good in like my meaty seitans. You just have regular paprika, you can just go for it, but the smoked really just makes the flavors just I'm going to be adding this to the rest of the seitan. Right. So we're just going to try to knead it all together. So heads up, this is going to be extremely messy if you end up using the beet chunk like what I did so that you can get the most color. Then we're going to have to kind of chop it in. So we're going to do the chopping and kneading method. I'm just going to really knead it back together. Separate out about like a third of this gluten, because this is going to be kind of the skin for the whole roast. I'm just going to grab a few chunks like so. They don't have to be uniform, but we kind of just want them to be laid out into strips, or like kind of like this. Like we just want it to just kind of like long chunks. It doesn't need to be completely like uniform. You just really want like long strips, kind of like this. This is going to be kind of like, if you think about how like mussels are, it's just like these, I don't know, they kind of like lay over each other and they're kind of melded over together, and that's kind of what we're trying to replicate. It's like if you've been vegan for a really long time like me, and the idea of eating animals really grosses you out, and you're like, oh, I don't want to eat like actual muscle, think of it like sculpture. You know, like it's kind of fun to have like make believe and be like, whoa, how was I able to make something look so gruesome? It's like art for me. Like honestly, like when I can get something that looks so close to actual meat or actual muscle. It's like I would never like eat real muscle in real life, but in this sense, totally. So we're literally just going to be taking this and we're going to be layering them together. So I just want to make all these little strips. The more, honestly, the better. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's going to be something close to a skin. And I'm just really just like flattening it out. And as you can see, like it kind of like webs out. Like I don't know if you can see how like this all is like webbing out. It's okay if there's like some holes poking out. You just want something to kind of help like encase it. It just helps it create more layers, if that makes sense. Because that's the one thing that I really think of as lacking in a lot of vegan meats, is like the texture is just really like, it's just all one texture. We want multiple kinds of textures in our meat, because that's really what's it like in nature, right? Alright, so now that we are going to be making our fat ribbons for the steak, so we're going to be taking our set aside starch water. See here how the water has separated from it, so we're going to pour off the water and then leave the white starch at the bottom. be adding a tablespoon of mushroom seasoning. I really love this stuff. I got this from my local Asian supermarket. In the past, I've been able to find it at H Mart. This one I got from a place called Uiji Maya. You can also order it online. I really like it. Otherwise, you could use like a teaspoon of MSG instead. Because MSG is really great flavor enhancer, and it'll really help the fat sauce have that like umami, savory bite to it. A pinch, you could do a little bit of salt and mushroom powder. You don't want to just do straight up mushroom powder if you don't have the mushroom seasoning, just because it won't be salty enough. Do 2 tablespoons of melted coconut oil. Now, and this is optional. I learned about this ingredient from another blogger called Sauce Stash. This is an ingredient called methyl cellulose. When it heats up, it becomes a little bit more solid. I've noticed that it helps make more distinct fat layers. Like I said, this is optional, although I do really recommend it because it does make the fat layers really stand out in a way that it wouldn't otherwise. I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of it. I'm doing 2 heaping teaspoons, maybe we can just do 3. That's really thickening this up, and it's also going to make it a little bit foamy. It's where we're going to actually be like assembling and putting all of our meat together. Right now I have some homemade beef broth going. If you want to make your own vegan beef broth, be sure to click the link right here, and then that way you can make your own from scratch broth to go with this homemade seitan. I really recommend it. However, if you want to save some time, you can use some pre-made vegan beef bouillon, whatever you prefer. Alright, so let's get assembling this. So we have our strips, and as you can see, these got really like bloody. Look at that. Like, this is crazy that we're in a vegan kitchen and it looks this gruesome. Alright, and then here I have the little skin that we're going to be doing. It's going to be really awesome. So what I'm going to do for the very first step is take some of this skin and lay it inside of the bowl. So since this is, tried to stretch it out, and I don't want too many of these holes here, so I'm just going to kind of cut it. You can kind of see what I'm doing here. Break it up so it's just kind of like one big flab. So we kind of want something like this, where it's pretty solid, and then we're going to line the inside of the bowl with this. And since this is pretty stretchy, you can try to stretch it out nice and thin throughout the whole bowl. Alright, so we're going to take our first little strip like this, nice and long, and we're going to have it go in the same direction. And now we're going to take the next one, take this, we're going to dip it in our little fat starch solution that we made here. I don't know if you see how thick this is. We're going to alternate between, so like this is nice and fully coated, going right over. It's okay, there's going to be some spillage. This is going to seep out. So it might look like there's a lot of like fat layer, but most of it is going to seep out when we're simmering it. Some of it will be left, but now we are with this like really long shape, kind of like this. So what we're going to want to do is just kind of fold everything in. You're going to want to try to fold it in the same direction here. So we're just going to flip it over. Ooh. I'm going to try to tuck it in. You see there's a little bit of oozing, but that's okay. So we're just going to grab that. Yeah, look at that. See, it's starting to contain the starch inside. Now we kind of want this to be somewhat contained. This step is optional, but I found that it helps hold everything together a lot better. I'm going to get my blowtorch out. Alright, so our seitan was simmering for 2 hours. If you want to let it go for even longer, you can. The main thing with the seitan is that you want to make sure that it's at a very low temperature, cooked for a very long time. So at least 2 hours, and then we are going to take it out of the Instapot and let it rest overnight. I did not film that bit, but just trust me, just take it out. And now we're going to slice it before we simmer it for a second time. Alright, so now our next step is we're going to be cutting up our seitan steak. So I had this resting overnight, and to really get it firm up, and it's like nice and firm, like look at that. It's just beautiful. Alright, so now let's slice this. So we want to do like 2-inch like slices, like, you know, or like 1.5 inches or so. Like, we want pretty thick steaks, and this helps it kind of stay together a little bit. Otherwise, it's very succulent. It'll fall apart otherwise. So I'm just going to go in and slice that, and a serrated knife works the best. Thick slices here. Alright, so now we are going to put in all of our broth. I reserved my beefy broth and I just put it in this jar, so I'm going to be reusing it and simmering it again. This second simmer isn't going to be very long. It's only going to be for 1 hour. And then from there, it's going to be totally ready to go. Alright, it is the moment of truth. We've had this simmering for another hour, so we're going to pull it out all the little steaks with some tongs. Done. They're very soft. You can eat them right out of simmering them. However, they are the best if you pan fry them or grill them, just so that way they get nice and crispy. We just finished pan frying this. Grill it if you can. But otherwise, look at this. Oh, this is so perfect. Like, it's still really tender. It's still meaty. Try a bite of this. It's so soft. It's like, imagine if you could just like slow marinate some kind of like beef. It's just like, wow, this is probably like some of like the richest seitan meat I've ever had. It's so tender. You will love this.